Midway USA brand product designers have one straightforward goal: develop high-quality, technically sound products and deliver them to customers at reasonable prices. If you are immersed in the shooting sports industry and pay close attention to every single detail, you know our products are built right and stand up to everyday use. Who has shooting mats and range bag systems to hunting clothing and just about everything for the outdoors? Log on and shop 24/7 with super fast shipping. MidwayUSA.com. Whether you're just looking to stay warm during a hunt or need maximum concealment, the clothing you wear can make or break a hunt. At MidwayUSA.com, we understand hunting clothing has come a long way with more meticulously crafted camo patterns, advanced scent control technologies, and weatherproof options to withstand the elements. Hunters have to wait until their favorite season, but shouldn't wait on gear, which is why Midway USA offers super fast shipping. When you're ready for your next system, log on to MidwayUSA.com.
Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Harvesting Nature's Wild Fish and Game Podcast. You got your host here, Justin Townsend, and I'm joined by my best cooking buddy in the Great White North. He's my only cooking buddy in the Great White North, actually. So,
hey everybody.
I love it. I just love our awkward intros. It's good.
I feel like you make it very awkward for me.
I do. I do it on purpose. I do it for you, Adam.
Oh, thank you.
So today we've got a cool butchering episode. So this is one of our cooking by cut. So, geez, at this point, I think we're one episode closer than we were last time we talked about butchering. We are going to focus today on the tri-tip and the eye of round, which are both located in the back quarter of the animal. And, this is mostly geared towards big game. If you want to be really precise, I'm sure you could carve a tri-tip out of a rabbit back quarter, but you may have to get out some scalpels and tweezers and stuff like that. So same with the eye round. Both smaller cuts, but still like really, really great flavorful cuts. And some of my two favorites from that back portion, if I'm looking for something unique, they're both really easily identifiable, which I think makes it fun when you're butchering because you can kind of pick out some of those that don't just look like kind of like globs of meat. And then our next episode after this one will be an antler and fin episode, and Adam's going to determine what that's going to be shortly, so we'll stand by on that one. And then the following cooking by cut episode that we'll talk about, we'll finish out the sirloin area, and we'll talk about the top sirloin and the sirloin tip. Which are both really fun cuts, kind of an extension of the loin primal, but operate a little differently. And then we'll continue on. Doubt we'll do another shank episode because we talked about the four shanks, so I don't think there's a necessarily need to talk about the rear shanks. The component's going to be the same on them. A little bit of different anatomy in the muscles, but not quite super, super different. So, and then we will move on into some of the offal. Which will be really cool because we'll talk about some of those different cuts that some folks commonly throw into the gut pile. And we'll continue on. So we've changed up the formatting of our show a little bit. We've done a little bit of a division in the way that we lay it out instead of just being like guest crew, guest crew, guest crew, guest crew. We've tried to divide it up to where we've got some different segments running inside of it to kind of give some good variety. So give us some feedback on that. Let us know if you like it. Do that social media, email, leave a review, whatever. You have to leave a word review or we just see a star compilation of it. And that'll let us know. Some other big news, too, is we've got our wild fungi blend that came out a couple weeks ago. And just like all of our game blends and fish blends, this one's designed specifically to enhance the taste and flavor of wild mushrooms. It also works on domestic mushrooms and lots of other things, actually. It's a really great seasoning seasoning, a lot of basil, parsley, garlic, onion, thyme, and some other secret blend of spices. No salt in this one, which I'm pretty proud of. We've been trending towards the no salt aspect. That way you can control the amount of salt you put in there. Some people like a lot of salt, some people like a little salt. I don't want it to be up to us to dictate how much salt should be in your blend, whereas you see a lot of spice blends out there, several big name brands that are so much sodium that you just get that like salt enhancement flavor, and it's easy to ruin a good cut of meat by dumping a bunch of salt on it versus like actually being able to taste the herbs and spices and vegetables and whatever else is in there like come through very naturally. So we pride ourselves in the fact that you can literally just like roll pieces of meat and pieces of fish and mushroom, like coat them well in our spices and then eat them, and they're going to taste magically delicious. Probably going to get sued for saying
I like the lack of salt in a lot of ways too, especially when dealing with mushrooms with this new blend. Like with a lot of different vegetables and everything, mushrooms, if you salt them too early, will release all their liquid. Sometimes you want that to happen, sometimes you don't. But if you have a blend that has a ton of salt in it, you're just going to have to season only at the end. Otherwise, you're going to lose all the liquid out of your mushrooms right off the hop, which you may not want to do depending on what you're cooking. So like, if you want like that nice crusty brown sear on the mushrooms, salting them early is not going to allow that to happen. So this way you can get that like seasoning blend on the mushrooms and then sear them nice and crispy and then salt them at the end, which is very, very beneficial. And you're not likely going to find any other blends out there that are salt free or low salt. So I think there's lots of good reasons for that.
And then later this month, actually, you mentioned that we're going to have an article coming out about how to properly salt meat and steaks and cuts and all that stuff. So we'll dive into that. I think it's a great topic to get into, but I agree with Adam too. Like I definitely am kind of picky at the points in which I choose my salts. The other thing too is I've been helping a friend out. I've been making sausages for him. So he goes out and harvests the animal, and I've showed him a couple times how to make sausage. And then a couple weeks ago, I picked up like 20 pounds of bison from him, ground bison, and made sausage for him. And actually used our Upland Fowl blend because it has no salt in it. So I could do my salt ratio myself for the sausages, salt, meat, fat, and then add my spice in, and I didn't have to worry about affecting that salt ratio by adding in a really salty blend and the flavor is like super fantastic. If you've had our waterfowl blend, it's like a big, bold, flavorful, like chop house blend is the way I can think about it. And man, oh man, it makes a great sausage. So I've been using that kind of as a good go-to for wild pork sausage, for venison sausage, elk, bison, buffalo, all that stuff. So it's come out really well. I even used it in some goose meatballs the other night from our snow goose camp. It's pretty tasty. Which reminds me, since we're kind of on the topic of this, we'll get into the meat here in just a minute. We have both of our camps available online with updated dates. So you've got the first weekend in December, I think December 5th through the 8th is our wild pig camp. That's available up on our website. And then also you've got our Snow Goose Camp, which is the 20th through the 23rd of February in Missouri. That in 2025. So we're looking a year forward. So we're getting to that time period in the time of year where people start really sweeping up the camps. I've already started answering a bunch of emails and questions and stuff like that. So people are interested. So if you are interested, head over to the Harvesting Nature website, pick up or sign up for one of the camps. Really, I think that's a.
And if you're on the fence about it, go back into our podcast and give them a listen. We have a podcast after one of the pig camps and a podcast after one of the goose camps. If you want to get like a sense of what our guests kind of felt afterwards and how they liked it, it gives you a really first-hand experience. So if you're kind of on the fence, give a podcast a listen and check it out.
And they're both embedded onto the product pages in the store. There's a YouTube video for the pig camp, and you can listen to the podcast, and then you can listen to the podcast for the Snow Goose Camp there as well. So as you listen to the podcast, you can just be like, I'm sold, and click buy. If you like. And the other thing too is this is big news for us and kind of rob some time from the meat, but we decided to go very, very minimal advertising on our website. So we heard everybody, the concerns, the complaints, everything over the past few months. We were operating with kind of like one of those big out-of-the-box ad companies and running some ads on there. We weren't real happy with the functionality of it and the fact that you, our fans, listeners, viewers, whatever community, weren't able to like easily and effectively and quickly access our content. And so 3 days ago, Adam, I just pulled the plug. I said, we're done with it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to seek out a couple of premier title sponsors, probably one within the outdoor industry and one outside the outdoor industry that we believe in, that support our values. We're not going to go with just anyone, and we'll use our partnership with them to help fund our operations. We also don't make a ton of money from this. We all have day jobs and other things we do. So really it's to pay the writers, pay the bills, keep the lights on, keep the website running. Occasionally we'll buy ourselves a beer or a coffee, which you can also do on our website now too. You can buy us a coffee there and donate $3, $6, $9 to us, which goes into a big pot, which we use for operational expenses. I'll shut up now. Well, I'll shut up about this. I'm going to keep talking because it's a podcast. Let's talk about cuts here. Actually, Adam, sorry, what do you have going on? Have the things popped up yet for you?
Well, today I made my first dish with dandelion greens. So I made like a kind of a cool braised chickpea and dandelion dish for lunch, which was incredible. And so things are finally popping up. It's taken a little while, but I think the knotweed's going to be up soon, for better or worse. Dandelion greens, the nettle's coming up. Keep my eyes open for morels. So I'm excited to finally have the season arrive. I'm sure the ramps will be coming soon too. So it's hard watching, on the Facebook groups and everything, watching everyone in the south of me, having been enjoying all this stuff for a month or two already. So I've just been super jelly, waiting for my turn, and now it's finally arriving. So I'm happy about that.
We posted this turkey Kiev recipe the other day, and a lot of good comments and feedback on that. Everybody seemed to really like it. It's a cool recipe. Go check it out. We'll put it in the show notes. But I had somebody reach out to me and was like, the ramps just came up in my area, so instead of the the green onions inside of it, or the chives and all that stuff that I had put in, and scallions that I'd put inside in the butter, the compound butter, before you roll the turkey around it, they were like, I'm gonna use ramps. And I was like, that's exactly what I want to hear. I'm like, yeah, super excited. Turkey season opens for me this weekend, so I'm planning to go out on Saturday and hopefully be shined positively on by the hunting gods, and can bring home a long beard and make the turkey Kiev again, because it's so phenomenal. It's super tasty, super decadent too, but what a great dish. All right, tri-tip. Let's do it. So the tri-tip is a boneless cut consisting of, you may guessed it, a triangular portion of meat, and it's found in what we call the bottom sirloin butt. It's part of the sirloin primal. So if you've got your back leg, you've got it divided into the round primal and the sirloin primal. Well, this one comes from the sirloin. It's relatively small on rabbits, as we mentioned, but also it's smaller on deer and wild pig. It's fairly good sized on elk, and of course buffalo and bison, and some of your larger deer breeds if you're a person who hunts exotic animals. A lot of folks, just by the nature of the size of the cut and maybe not recognizing what it is, it will very commonly end up in a grind pile, or just kind of left connected to either the top sirloin or the sirloin tip. I think that it's a very tasty cut. We'll talk a little bit about kind of the culinary history, which I think is super cool on this cut, and how it plays into it's a good, fairly flavorful marbled cut on domestic animals. It's very flavorful on game animals too, just not as marbled, of course. I would say in larger deer or elk or moose, that the one tri-tip would be good for a meal for a couple people. Maybe a moose. Adam, I don't know, you have more experience with moose than I do. Probably several people.
Yeah, it'd probably be good for a small group.
Depends on how ravished they are.
Yeah, and moose definitely vary in size by quite a bit too. So, a huge bull moose, you're probably getting a nice big meal out of it. But a cow moose probably feed 2 to 4 people, I would say.
Yeah, I'd probably say the same for elk as well. Characteristically, if you look at the flavor profile, you're going to get very similar to what you have in the top round, top sirloin, which makes sense because they're connected. And then it's got a good, what we would classify as like kind of a beefy flavor or a deery flavor.
Moosey, bisony.
Moosey flavor, bisony. It tastes like the animal from which it came, unlike a lot of the other loin cuts, which may be kind of lacking in kind of that fun, bold flavor you would expect out of an animal. I mentioned the marbling. And so it is like, it's a tender cut, but it's that triangle shape kind of gives it a bit, and it's not like a full like triangle, like don't think like an acute, what are they? I'm going to go back in my...
Isosceles or...
Equilateral.
Equilateral
triangle, or isosceles, or an acute triangle. It's kind of like, it's triangle-esque. It kind of... I guess kind of looks like a mix between a guitar pick and like something else. I don't know. Another triangle, I guess would be a way I would think of it. Also, too, it's got no fat cap on it, so you're not really going to get a lot of fat on the top of the cut. But it's also more tender than a lot of other parts within the back leg, especially your round cuts, which, although good and can be utilized as a steak or jerky or anything, like we discussed in our last Cooking by Cuts episode, the tri-tip's going to kind of set itself apart from that. And two, a relatively, I would say, loose quotes, newer popularized cut, if we talk about like the evolution of butchery. So, Adam, you want to talk about kind of where it's located at?
Like you mentioned, it's kind of in the bottom sirloin area. So if you're following the femur bone, kind of what you would call the kneecap, you can find the sirloin tip, and on top of that, the top sirloin, and kind of in between is the tri-tip. The area where it's found is called the tensor fascia latae, or Latae, and it obviously is found in the hind quarter, so it's going to share some of the similarities that the other cuts in that area have. Generally, meaning it's going to be lean, and it's going to have a bit of extra flavor, and it might be a little tougher than you might find elsewhere in the animal. Although this cut, the tri-tip, tends to be a little more tender than the rest of the cuts in the area, like the round cuts.
So I would say too, like, I think about removing it. I always kind of butchered the back quarter the same way. So you'd start in that typical fashion that I like, is with that joint facing up. So like joint facing up, the bottom end of the shank to me, and I kind of look at it there. That way I can pick out the bottom round just very easily. But if you find the joint, the ball of the joint there that'll be protruding out from the back quarter, where it would connect to the inside of the pelvic bone on the animal, you'll see that if you go straight up from that, is your top sirloin. It's kind of like a chunk of meat. The next easiest cut to locate is if you're looking at the leg, and we'll talk posterior being the rear of the leg and the anterior being the front of the leg. If you look towards the anterior portion, so that would be towards where would be the front of the animal, obviously, you'll have your sirloin tip. And that's that kind of football-shaped looking cut there. Very easily, in my mind, to identify. So if you look between those two, one looks like kind of more of a glob of meat, and the other looks like a football. And if you look in there, at the top of the football, you've got this kind of like wraparound piece of meat that looks like kind of like a little triangle glove holding on to the top of the sirloin tip. That is the tri-tip. And so once you locate the seams, there'll be one seam that runs along the top of the sirloin tip, and there'll be one seam where it connects to the top sirloin. And you'll just kind of work your knife in combination of your fingers. It's very easy to pull apart, and you can kind of cut and pull it away. And then what you want to do is you want to trim away that silver skin, just like with anything, because we're going to recommend some things with this, but you're not going to want the silver skin on that cut.
I find watching people butcher animals, it's often the sirloin tip or the football roast. Like you said, it's very easy to identify. So people will cut that right off, and then you got this dangly bit on the top that people are like, well, just trim off and throw into the grass pile.
But that's the tri-tip.
That's the tri-tip. So most people who've butchered at home have probably felt that weird dangly bit on their sirloin tip or football roast and have tossed it away, but it is worth keeping.
You want to hit on the culinary history?
Sure. Like many cuts that we've found, this cut of meat has a lot of different names. So you might see it labeled as a triangle steak, a triangle tip, the Santa Maria steak, the Newport steak, the aiguillette baron, which is in France, in a lot of Europe, we'll call it that. Sometimes known as the bottom sirloin, the knuckle cap, the rump tail, and the California cut. So any of those things might be used to describe the tri-tip. The cut was known in the United States as early as 1915, and often just called the triangle part of the loin butt. So you can tell the names have evolved a little bit since, like, over the last 100 years. And eventually a man by the name of Rondo Breu, he was a butcher for the army, and he was cutting meat for soldiers in World War II, and he claims to have invented this cut, the actual tri-tip cut. And he modified the usual cuts around it to, leave the tri-tip whole and to minimize waste as well. It went over well, apparently, with the soldiers. He brought it back home to California after the war and continued selling it. And it caught on there. By the 1950s, there was all sorts of people kind of claiming ownership. So if you can go down a Wikipedia or Google hole for a while, just finding all these different people who say they were the first ones to, make a famous dish out of it. But the most famous, it seems, is the Santa Maria steak, which is this kind of Santa Maria style Californian barbecue. So if you picture, like, Texas has a brisket, maybe the Carolinas have the pork shoulder, Santa Maria in California has this, like, whole roasted tri-tip. And it's very popular and kind of an integral part of the cuisine. And it's a cuisine I didn't actually know much about. So it's kind of this cool micro-region, this different style of barbecue that I have not tried. And I would very much like to now that I've figured all this out about it.
What's your tri-tip sandwich?
Yeah.
When you see that advertised in anywhere, generally that's what they're shooting for. That's awesome. Yeah, it's a whole, like, Santa Maria style barbecue that focuses on the tri-tip. And see, like, when I was out in California too, I lived in San Diego, not near Santa Maria, which is up kind of Northern California, the Central Coast area. It very much was popular there, but I was like, why? Like, tri-tip? Like, yeah, I guess so. Which sounds great. So, I'm looking at some cool recipes for this. Tri-tip's true origin. Find it in Southern California. But if you're Chicago asking for tri-tip, it's considered a regional meat.
And it's true. Apparently, if you're looking for it, the closer you are to California, the easier it is you're gonna have to find it at a butcher shop or something like that. So if you're out, like, where I am in Eastern Ontario or Quebec, or I don't know about in Colorado, but you're more likely to find it in your own animal rather than at the butcher shop. I don't think I've ever come across a tri-tip here. Not to say that it's impossible, but you're going to be searching probably a little harder.
I think, yeah, like Costco. Costco, I think, too, is a very West Coast brand. I think that's one of the common cuts they carry there.
Interesting.
I would say cooking, like I mentioned earlier, based on its shape, so it could be a little awkward to cook just because you're going to get some inconsistencies in the temperatures across it, just because you've got different thicknesses of meat. So the center may obviously cook slower than the outside tips, which I think too is why a lot of folks, if you've got some sort of, like, slow, indirect cooking method to it, could work well. But I think with wild game, it's so small that you're not really going to see much of a difference. It's got a good, consistent grain, which makes it easy for slicing. So that's good. You can easily find the directions. And I think, too, it's like one of the optimal cuts for grilling. So something quick, fast, at high heat, direct heat, or on the opposite side of that, if you've got a bigger cut off like a moose, an elk, a bison, you could probably slow cook it. You could even sous vide it and then do the reverse sear. I wouldn't try to, like, cook it to a point that you're going to where you're going to try to shred it. I don't know. What do you think on that, Adam?
Yeah, the lack of marbling in it would lead me to try to cook it, like, keep it at least medium or medium rare. Even if you're slow cooking it, you want to just slowly cook it to the point where it is medium rather than cook it down into oblivion. There's cuts that are better suited for that. This one's more of a kind of something to be eaten at medium or medium rare.
And I think too, when you talk about the hind quarter, there's so many big cuts that you could braise or slow roast or things like that too, like a fully cooked texture that would be really good versus trying to, like, use this cut for that. When I sort my freezer and I sort it by, like, what I'll loosely call your roast cuts, your slow cooked cuts, and then your steak cuts, the tri-tip always goes into the steak area, and I always use it like kind of a quick, fast, either a sear in a pan or a grill type scenario. That way I get the most out of it for me personally. But also too, as we mentioned with some of our other cuts that are kind of more thin, like we were talking about the flank steak and the skirt steak, you get those thinner cuts. Those take well to marinades, so this I would put in that category as well, of something that would take well to a marinade.
Definitely. And if you're just doing it off like a whitetail or mule deer, I would be inclined to package the two tri-tips together for a meal. Like you're just saying how you organize your freezer there, I would probably put them together. Unless there's just only one or two people going to be eating it, I would, there's probably not going to be enough to feed a family, so throw them together into the same package probably.
Hunting boots are a critical component of any successful hunt. Whether walking a short distance to your blind or trudging miles through rugged terrain, your feet are carrying the load. Without the right boots, you could give up early and lose out on that trophy just over the ridge. At Midway USA, we make selecting boots for your next hunt easier. With just a few clicks of a mouse, you can decide on what's important, like waterproofing, insulation, size, width, and savings. For just about everything for shooting, hunting, and the outdoors, check out MidwayUSA.com.
Fishing like a local isn't just about catching fish. It's about connecting with the environment and the people who call it home. It's about hearing the stories and traditions that have been passed down for generations and sharing unforgettable moments with the people you meet along the way. Fishing like a local is having an experience that stays with you forever. And with Fishing Booker, you can experience it too, no matter where you are. Discover your next adventure on Fishing Booker.
So, the Eye of Round is also one of my other favorite. I have several favorite cuts on the hind quarter. I like it. I look to the front shoulder for a lot of flavor stuff, and I look for the utilitarianness. Does that make sense? Of the hind quarter, because there's so much diversity and so much ability to do so many different things with all these different cuts. And I think the Eye of Round, we talked about the top and the bottom round and the ability for them to be used for different things. I like the Eye of Round to be used like seared, cross-cut into medallions. It reminds me of like a smaller loin, but with better flavor, and all that stuff. So let's get into that. So it is, just as I mentioned, small and cylinder-shaped. Similar to the tenderloin in shape. I think it looks like, I'm going to use this reference, like a cigar tube. Is what it kind of reminds me of. Once you trim it up and cut it down, it looks like a cigar tube.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same tapering that the tenderloin has. It's more even across the whole thing.
Yeah. So it's a lean muscle that's part of the primal round group, as we talked about. So now we've moved down to a different part of the hind quarter. It's used for locomotive and support purposes. So it helps the animal move, but also helps it stand and hold itself together. It's got good flavor, very much like the tri-tip, but it's lean and it's got more of a bite. I won't call it quite as tough as you think of some of the other cuts, but it does have more bite and more chew than your tenderloin or your loin or some of your flat iron steak from the front, or if you were to make steaks out of some of these other larger cuts. So be prepared for that. I still think it's an excellent candidate for the sear or the roast to a good internal temp. It is located on the inside thigh of the animal in the group round muscles. We mentioned that, which include the top round, the bottom round, and the eye of round. It's connected to both the top and the bottom round. I generally, when I cut it off, it's left, so I remove the bottom round first. Think about it, ball joint upwards. Look for that big rectangle cut of meat, the two parallel seams. That is your bottom round. So if you take that off, one of those leftover seams on the posterior part of the hind quarter will be the seam of the eye of round, and you'll see that cigar tube shape sitting there. And so you just kind of peel that off of the top round, which comes off really easy. It's really identifiable too. So it can also be known as the breakfast steak, the wafer steak, the sandwich steak, the minute steak, the cube steak, the eye steak, the eye of round, the round eye roast, the eye of knuckle. So kind of a lot of different names wherever you see it. I'm guessing it's probably been such a commonly used cut within those group of primals that culinary history probably dates way, way back. I'll turn it over to Adam to talk a little bit about the cooking.
Yeah, I found a similar problem when we were talking about the top and bottom round, in that there's not much interesting history because they're just big muscles that have been used forever, and there's no like plucky individual from like the 20s who started a restaurant and started using this cut or anything. It's just there. It's meat. Mm-hmm. There's nothing too entertaining about it, but sometimes the parts that aren't that entertaining are good, like just good solid things to have there, and I find the eye round is one of those. Talking about cooking, I agree totally with Justin. My favorite thing is to just take it out whole, sear it whole, slice it super thin after resting, and eating it like medium rare, and it's delicious like that. You do have to watch out, since it's so lean, it can very easily dry out, and that's even true with, say, if you're using like domestic cuts like beef or pork. It's very lean without much intramuscular fat. It can dry out. So cook rare to medium rare, or you can slow cook in liquid until it's falling apart. But like we said before, the shoulder, top round, bottom round are probably better candidates for that. Since the eye round is relatively small, I wouldn't bother braising it unless you're doing something kind of fancy with it. So like I said, you can leave it whole, sear or roast it, slice it thinly. You can just kind of half freeze it, slice it super thin, and then it's like the perfect candidate for using for pho. So if you've had Vietnamese pho before, usually there's like a little pile of like rare beef or red meat on top, and the pho broth gets poured over and ends up like cooking the thinly sliced meat. And eye of round is probably one of the better candidates for using that. So if you want to try out your own venison or elk or moose pho, this is perfect for it. You can also slice it thinly while raw, marinate it in like something with a lot of spices, and then fry it up in a skillet, and that's really good for something like shawarma or different sandwiches or wraps like that. Since you're probably not going to have a vertical spit at home, making a huge half animal on your vertical spit, you probably end up making a little bit in a skillet instead, and this is great for it. You can pound it just like the top and bottom round. It has a very similar texture, so you can pound it into cutlets or schnitzel. You can slice it thin for jerky. You can throw it into your grind. There are some things you can use for like thinly sliced or left whole and braised. Like I mentioned, it's not something I would use too often for braised, but there are some interesting things. Like there's a Korean dish called jangcharim, which is like a soy sauce based braise, and they would use eye round traditionally for something like that. And lastly, sliced thinly used for tacos or stir fries, which is a common theme on the hind leg. You'll find us talking about cutlets, stir fries, jerky quite a bit, because it just kind of fits all those things really nicely.
That sounds great. But I still I fall back that the Korean soy sauce braise piqued my interest, but I still I fall back to I think this is a cut that because it does have flavor and it's easily used to just keep it simple, trim off silver skin, season it, sear it, and slice and enjoy.
Yeah.
But I do like the idea too of using it in pho. That sounds cool.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect meat grain kind of texture for something like pho, where it's just if you put it in the freezer for 15 minutes just so it kind of half freezes, you can slice super thin. Yeah, it's just really good like that. But I found it's a really good candidate for something generally the way I approach it. I'm going to keep it super simple, like you said. Sear it in a cast iron pan. If it's bigger one, I might throw it in the oven, or I might just let the sear do the work for the cooking. And then that's just a really simple piece of meat. So if you're interested in screwing around with a cool French sauce or something, maybe an Asian sauce or something that's a little keep the meat really simple, and then work on something kind of like a fancy sauce or accoutrement for it, I find there's a lot of fun doing that rather than trying to get fancy with the meat itself.
With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
Oh, that's awesome.
Don't
Don't miss Thursdays with Saltwater Experience, brought to you by Golden Boat Lifts, every Thursday night from 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern on Waypoint TV, the destination for outdoor entertainment.
All right, so let's cover a bit of the recipes, talk about the good stuff. We've talked a lot about the meat. Think we can focus a bit on the food. We're going to do a mix of kind of our recipes. We'll also talk a little different. Normally, we just focus specifically on like, this is good for this cut or this is good for that cut, but we're going to cover kind of recipes that are good for both cuts in just a minute. So first one I want to talk about, if you head over to the Forager Chef website, that's Alan Burgo's website. He has a delicious grilled venison tri-tip recipe, which is pretty straightforward. He talks a little bit about trimming it, where it's located, how it's smaller on deer versus beef, and then he goes into it. So he just really, this is a very straightforward recipe. So he does grilling, so he grills it, and then, but what he does is he creates a chili rub, which got like chili powder and cumin and cinnamon and garlic powder. Cool thing that he incorporates on here is he uses some dried ramps, which I think is cool flavorings. We mentioned that earlier. It's a great time of year for it. And then cayenne pepper, onion powder, and ground black pepper. And so just kind of season those up, and he allows it to rest overnight with some salt, kind of does a dry brine. Oh wait, nope, back that up. Season it all with salt and allow it to rest overnight. So he does that, and then he rubs it down with chili, and then he grills it. But you could also do it, sear it in a pan or cast iron skillet, or you can roast it in the oven, he mentions. I think it'd be a great candidate just to put on the grill. Perfect time of year for it as things start to get warmer. It's super quick. If you've got, 2 or 3 or 4 of these, they'd make a good meal. If you've got bigger cuts, as we mentioned of the tri-tip earlier, like you could probably get away with one. But yeah, those would be a great option for the tri-tip. Adam, do you want to talk about the next one? We'll move up in size to the elk tri-tip.
Sure. This recipe is coming from our friends at Passalacqua Winery, and it is by Christy Crabtree. And what she does is a very similar recipe, but you have a larger piece of meat. This one's clocking in around 2 pounds or so. You're just going to create basically a rub for the tri-tip, including garlic powder, rosemary, pepper, salt. Brush it down with a little bit of oil, marinate it for a little bit, and then you're creating a chimichurri, which is an Argentinian sauce with parsley, garlic, and some bell pepper, as well as some lemon juice and zest, and some red pepper flakes. And I know you love chimichurri, Justin. I love chimichurri. And
I love chimichurri.
This is just basically grilling the tri-tip whole with that kind of seasoning rub on it, and then slicing it after letting it rest and slathering it with chimichurri. It's super simple, but it's going to be delicious. Chimichurri on any kind of flavorful steak is always going to be good. So that's another nice and simple recipe for whole grilled tri-tip.
Ooh, that sounds good. The chimichurri, like straightforward with the addition of a cool sauce, I think is a theme amongst these recipes, which was really good. I'll talk now a little bit about, so moving into an even bigger cut of meat, the tri-tip from a bison or buffalo, and this is coming from thehonestbison.com, which I believe is a meat company selling lovely buffalo or bison meat.
Normally not where we look for recipes generally, but what I like about this one is it's the Santa Maria style, which we mentioned earlier, and I just wanted to get into that a little bit because it's a pretty cool recipe.
So with this one, so they're using what they called so they're doing 1 2 to 3 pound bison tri-tip, and they're using a California rub, loose quotes, which consists of finely ground coffee, kosher salt, granulated garlic, black pepper, brown sugar, cayenne pepper, ground cloves, and cinnamon. And then you're going to massage this into the meat and let it really sit on it for an hour or so in the refrigerator. And then you're going to preheat your oven or prepare a charcoal grill, and then you're going to place on there and cook for 6 to 8 minutes per side, or until a nice char, but don't grill it, they say, for more than 20 minutes total, which seems like you, as we mentioned, you would dry out a cut like that. Remove it, cover it with tin foil, and then place it. So really that first initial step, you're just trying to get a good sear on it and a good char. And then you're going to place it in an oven for 10 to 20 minutes until the internal temperature reaches 120. So that's your rare cooking temp. You don't want to overcook it. You're going to let it roast on the cutting board for 8 to 10 minutes, which should bring it up 5 degrees. That's a rule of thumb. Like as you're cooking in the pan, expect your temperature to raise 5 degrees up whenever you pull it out of the oven, the pan, whatever. And then slice against the grain, and the center should be distinctly red. I would say probably while they're serving this as the style of like the Santa Maria, I would probably imagine there's some sort of like smoking or more barbecue-esque involved in the Santa Maria style versus just putting in the oven. But I could be wrong. I'll have to dive in more on that. But I would expect some sort of like smoker or smoked meat type process with them.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you want to hit on your recipe from your website, this venison cube steak sandwich?
Sure, and this one can be found on the Harvest Nature website and on the Intrepid Eater website. Yeah, so it's kind of a little bit of both. This is one I made really recently, and I actually used, I think, bottom round for it, but it could easily be made with eye round or with the tri-tip. So this is a pretty easy sandwich to make with all sorts of different cuts of meat. I just called it kind of a cube steak. I butcher all my own meat, obviously, so I don't end up with cube steaks, which are usually mechanically tenderized, but I instead use a meat mallet and self-mechanically tenderize my meat. So I have the meat mallet with like the kind of spikes on one end, and I just go to town and whack the hell of it. And you could either do the tri-tip itself and tenderize it and pound it a little thinner, or you can take the eye round, butterfly it. So what you do is just like kind of splitting it in half, opening it up and pound that thinner. Or if you have a larger eye from something like a bison, moose, or elk, you could probably cut it into steaks on a bias. So cut them diagonal to get a little more surface area, and then pound those thin with your mallet. So this would work well with lots of different cuts. And on the same line with the other recipe, I made a chimichurri for this, but I made mine a little different. Usually chimichurri consists of just like parsley and olive oil and maybe some lemon and little red pepper chilies, but I kind of went more of a Mexican style chimichurri with this. I broiled a whole poblano pepper till the skin is nice and black and blistered, removed the skin, chopped it, threw it into a mortar and pestle. You could use a blender too, but I like my mortar and pestle. And I added a bunch of parsley, cilantro, garlic, salt, a little bit of oil, and some lime juice, and just smashed it all to hell with my mortar and pestle. You could tell I might have been a little angry making this recipe from bashing things with mallet and then bashing things in the mortar. And I just take those steaks that I've tenderized with a mallet, season them generally and simply with salt and pepper, heat a little bit of lard or oil in a skillet, and just sear them. And I'm just cooking them. I'm not looking to cook them through, but because they're so thin, they're probably going to cook through. But don't overcook. Try not to overcook them. And then I just get some nice sourdough bread, slather it with mayo, stack on the steaks, a whole bunch of chimichurri sauce, and lettuce and tomato. And just the steaks are super tender because of the mallet and tenderization and pounding. And when you eat a sandwich, like a steak sandwich sometimes from like some crappy pub, and you take a bite and the whole steak kind of comes out with the sandwich because it's not nearly tender enough to bite through. This is not the case for this one. You can just have a nice clean bite right through it. It's that nice and tender. So those were pretty delicious sandwiches. I recommend everyone try these ones out.
Nice. No, that sounds super tasty. I drooled over the picture several times and the recipe as I read over it. So I encourage everybody to go check that one out. And then I'll talk a little bit about this is one I made a while back, and this, like, while I'm using elements of specific cuisines, in this case Korean, it's not necessarily a Korean dish. I'm using a Korean sauce to prepare this, but it's and actually too, I say gochujang chili paste in here, but I actually use gochugaru flakes and some other stuff, so I probably need to amend the recipe. But it's my version of a venison steak and broccoli dish that I kind of smashed a bunch of regional cuisines into one. But you could do this like with either cut. So you're essentially going to cut the steak, 1 to 2 pounds of steak kind of sliced up, chunked, cubed, however you want to do it. And then you'll use some broccoli, green onions, garlic cloves. And then for plating, I used soba noodles, some green onions, the scallions for garnish, and sesame seeds. And then I mixed it all. So very simple. You're going to combine your sauce ingredients, which are I put gochujang Korean chili paste, soy sauce, sesame oil, rice vinegar, and honey. So you actually, if you want to do what I did for this, you can use the gochugaru flakes and kind of like make your own version of a sauce, or just use any gochujang Korean chili paste that you can find at the store, or make your own. Mix that soy sauce, sesame oil, rice vinegar, and honey. That gives you your sauce that you're going to use for this dish. Then you're going to place your steaks in there and coat them with a 1/4 cup of the sauce. You're going to set the rest of that aside so you can use it later, and you're going to bring your oil to heat, add your garlic, green onion, broccoli, stir for 2 to 3 minutes, remove those, and place into a larger bowl and cover with the remaining sauce. Coat it well, and then using the same hot pan, you're going to sear each side of the steak slices and then add them to the large sauce bowl and like toss those around, fully coat them so they kind of stick to everything, and then serve it atop some soba noodles garnished with those sliced green scallions and the sesame seeds. And it's a very like Wednesday night kind of meal that's pretty straightforward, pretty quick to do. Probably the most time that it would take would be to cook the soba noodles, which you can even buy some of those pre-packed cooked ones if you're feeling unadventurous. But yeah, so that's a good one for the gochujang venison steak and broccoli. So that can be done with either steak or either cut a meat in this with the tri-tip. You can just slice it up, or with the eye round you could cross cut it into discs for a smaller one. And then if you had a bigger cut like an elk or bison or moose, you could cut it into rounds and then like quarter those rounds up, so you could have some like bite-sized steak bits is what you're looking for. So you want to talk about some bulgogi kimbap wrap rolls? It's a lot of consonants.
Sticking to the Korean theme, this recipe's from my website, theintrepideater.com. It's the venison bulgogi kimbap rolls. So for those who don't know, kimbap or gimbap, they're kind of like sushi, but generally have a lot of different fillings, and usually it has meat in it. So it's a Korean style of kimchi. I know Koreans probably don't like that comparison, but that's what people mostly know. I used the venison eye round for this one. And like I mentioned much earlier in the podcast, you basically slice thin, marinate, and cook in a skillet. I think I mentioned it'd be good for shawarma, but it works great with this too. So I took my eye round, I got it partially frozen because that always makes it much easier to slice very thinly. And then, so I sliced it super thin, and then I tossed it all in with a marinade made from Asian or Korean pear, which helps to enzymatically kind of break down the meat a little bit. Soy sauce, honey, mirin, sesame oil, brown sugar, garlic, onion, ginger, black pepper. So it's creating a pretty flavorful marinade for this. And because it's sliced so thin, the marinade is really penetrating the meat. I'm just going to add some oil or lard to a cast iron skillet, and basically just fry the meat up in there. That bulgogi meat is what we just basically made, and bulgogi can be used also for Korean dishes like bibimbap, which is basically like a rice bowl. You can put the meat on with like a fried egg and some vegetables, or you can use it to stuff these kimbap like I did. So making basically like a sticky rice, kind of like a sushi rice. And then some other fillings that go into these rolls are an omelet, so just like a plain egg omelet, julienned and sautéed carrots. There's spinach in it. There's a Korean yellow pickled radish, which I find at Asian grocery stores, as well as braised burdock root, which is really popular in Asian cuisine. You can, of course, do your own from scratch, like picked wild, or you can find it in any Asian store. And then I'm putting it all onto nori sheets, which is just the dry seaweed. And on my website, I have a comprehensive photo guide on how to actually like roll, like set up and roll the kimbap, which might be handy if you've never done before. So you roll it up in the seaweed and then you cut it into rounds and then serve them with soy sauce, and those are absolutely incredible and probably my very favorite way I've ever used eye round in anything. So yeah, it's a lot of steps and a bit of work, but it's totally worth it if you ever want to try it out.
You've made these at Pick Camp, right? Or a version?
Yeah, I made something very similar I made kind of like a Texas style kimbap off of like with pulled wild pork shoulder or neck, barbecue sauce, pickles, and coleslaw. So it's kind of a cool barbecue style.
I like it. The next one I'm going to talk about, and this will probably be the final one because we're closing up on time here, is antelope steak fingers. And before anybody comments or before I hear it, yes, I understand that antelope don't have fingers. It's part of like a larger joke too of fish don't have fingers either if you have like fish sticks or fish fingers. But I still think it's funny. But this recipe is like ingrained in me. So this goes back to, I think I published this recipe in 2020 in the spring. So this is like the epicenter of it's the peak time of COVID here in the U.S. When everything was closing down, kids were home from school, all this other stuff. My mom had also just left, I think, and so this is a recipe that she used to make for me when I was a young boy, which I'm very, very happy with. And actually, I'm just reading the article now. She was in town because my son was born in the same week, so she was here. So we made this while she was here. So this is a fairly quick recipe. It takes about 20 minutes of prep time and about 20 minutes of cooking, but it is one of my favorite childhood foods. So you're going to use 1 pound of antelope steak, tenderize it with a mallet. So mallet would be great for your tri-tip, and then you could butterfly out, like Adam mentioned, the eye of round, and then cut it into kind of like rectangular finger type shapes for this. If you used both of them, you'd probably get that. Same with the tri-tip, or like some combination thereof. You're going to salt, garlic powder, celery seed, chili powder, paprika, black pepper, 1 sleeve of saltine crackers, which you're going to crush up to a very fine consistency, 1 egg beaten, Worcestershire sauce, maple syrup, and a cup of flour. And so really, like, you can imagine what we're going to do with this. We're going to create a batter on the steak fingers that we have seasoned. After we've seasoned the strips of meat, you're going to do your egg wash, do your flour, your egg wash, and then into the crackers. And then you're going to bring a pot of oil to 350 degrees before that, so it's got time to come up. I would say one step in this that I don't mention in here is if you actually breaded these and let them set a little bit in like the refrigerator to kind of like firm up, you would probably get a better hold on the meat than if you just like battered and fried. That is a tip I admittedly will tell you that I learned from Hank Shaw. If you've got his book Hook, Line, and Supper, I think it's called, he talks about that in there, like the fish batter, like that holds on very well, you can set it kind of overnight and let that batter take really well to the meat. So you could do that, not necessarily overnight, but maybe batter them, set them aside on a baking dish or something, a baking pan, and then bring your oil up to temp and then cook it. And really, it's very straightforward, as is many fried meat recipes where you're just battering them and frying them, and then serve them with your sauce of choice. Highly recommended for kids, 10 out of 10, especially if you are young Justin Townsend, who was a big fan of these, as was both my youngest. Hasn't had him yet because he was just born then, and I don't think I've made him since, but he would be a fan. I know him. And my daughter, she loved them at the time. Actually, that's the picture. If you go see the recipe, that's her little paint slathered hand, all that. She was painting as we were making these, and we just used it as a canvas. So very great kid-friendly recipe to enjoy if you're looking for something quick, yummy, and that your kids will devour. I highly encourage this recipe. I think we've covered a good amount of recipes for these 2 cuts. There are certainly many, many others we can talk about, but these are some of the highlights that we feel. So we'll do a quick around the room and then close out. Adam, you got anything for last thoughts?
I think like the rear end and what we're dealing here, the hindquarters, we kind of mentioned a little bit before, but just noticing the versatility of it. Mm-hmm. They're kind of a blank canvas to a degree, and although the tri-tip is probably just better left whole and grilled, a lot of the other cuts in the hindquarters are going to be able to do a lot in different things. So yeah, try some of them out. Try something crazy. Try shawarma or kimbap, or try something simple like we mentioned with just searing it whole, or try something fun like the antelope fingers. There's just all sorts of different things and all sorts of opportunities for cool recipes in this kind of section of the animals. So don't get too caught up with roasting steaks and try something new.
Yeah, I think I'll echo that. The versatility of it, and I think too, when you have these sort of like other cuts that can perform a little different, like just play around with them, like Adam mentioned, see what you could do. I would discourage from the grind pile, especially these two. They have so much cool flavor and cool use that you can do with them. Also too, like, who doesn't want to learn more about Santa Maria style barbecue? That's what I'm thinking about. Maybe that's your next Antler and Fin, Adam.
I'll just Harvest Angel pay for a trip, like a journalistic trip there, right?
Yeah. Virtually journalistic trip. You can visit the barbecue halls of Santa Maria via Zoom.
sounds enchanting.
Well, I'd say that, like, folks go buy some coffees, and maybe we can send Adam to California to go on a research mission. We need more people to buy more spice blends and coffees and all that to fund excellent adventures to fuel your curiosity of Santa Maria style barbecue.
Yeah, it's a worthwhile cause.
I'll leave it with that. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll include the show notes, and then whatever podcast platform you're listening to, punch that 5-star button. Leave us a review. Tell us we're doing right, or tell us we're doing wrong. Thanks everybody. Have a good night.
One of the most legendary shows in the outdoors is on Waypoint TV. Don't miss Primo's Truth About Hunting, Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern on Waypoint TV, the destination for outdoor entertainment.